My name is Mike Thompson. I have elderly parents, but they are not my biological parents. My real parents passed away in a car accident when I was very young. With no relatives to turn to, I was placed in a foster care facility where I lived until I was 5. Although I felt lonely without a mom and dad, I was happy to have delicious food. Those were moments of sheer joy and my only pleasure. One day, a sophisticated elderly couple visited the facility. I have a vague memory of them watching me eat meals with their radiant smiles. They had such kind smiles. After a while, this couple, the Thompsons, decided to adopt me. I quickly opened up to them, calling them Grandpa and Grandma. Grandpa and Grandma grew vegetables in a small garden and sold them at the local farmer's market. The leftovers from the market, or the imperfect ones that couldn't be sold, would always end up on our dinner table. I love Grandma's pickled cucumbers and Grandpa's potato soup.
Be grateful for the food.
That was Grandpa's favorite saying.
There are many people who are struggling with no food to eat every day. We must be thankful for each meal. Mike, I hope you grow up to be someone who can help those who are hungry and struggling.
Got it. I nodded gravely, and Grandpa smiled gently. His teachings are deeply imprinted in my heart. Our life was never luxurious, but I was very happy growing up filled with lots of love. I helped with the garden work while also attending high school. After graduation, I planned to get a job to support our household, but Grandpa said, "Don't worry about the money, do what you want to do." I think Grandpa understood what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a job that could help people in the future. But at that time, I didn't have enough knowledge of what to do for that, and didn't even know where to start. So, I wanted to go to college and learn about social work, economics, logistics, and much more.
For times like this,
Grandpa said as he handed me a bank book. The account was in my name, Mike Thompson. He had been saving money for me to go to college. I couldn't hold back my tears at Grandpa's thoughtfulness. Since then, I studied hard and was able to get into the college I wanted. I was happy, but also felt guilty for putting a burden on Grandpa and Grandma. I had never seen them indulging in any luxuries. They always put me first, before themselves. Once I start working, I vowed to repay them in a big way. With that in mind, I threw myself into my studies. 4 years have passed since then. This spring, I graduated from college and got a job at a food company called Impress Foods. Impress Foods not only manufactures and sells food, but also focuses on social welfare through food. I learned this from Grandpa. One of his friends works at Impress Foods, and he happened to hear about it.
maybe the job you want to do is here,
said Grandpa. As a member of the sales department, I threw myself into everything from copying documents, inputting data, to handling phone calls. I arrived at work earlier than anyone else and thoroughly read documents to learn about our products. Sometimes I would accompany senior sales staff on their rounds. I wanted to learn the job quickly and become a full-fledged member of society. However, there was one person who didn't think well of me. It was Director Johnson, the head of the sales department. Director Johnson, who is also a member of the board of directors, is a powerful executive within the company. There were rumors that he was tough on people who didn't help him to get promoted, especially newcomers. And sure enough, I quickly caught his eye. He seemed to think of me as an intrusive and impertinent newcomer, as he saw me pleading with the senior sales staff to let me do anything. One day, Director Johnson suddenly came to my desk and ordered me to create a proposal for a new product.
You seem to be quite a hard worker, so you can do it in a day, right?
Well, that might be a bit.
What? You're new here and talking back.
I'm sorry. Unable to resist, I compiled as many ideas as I could and managed to create the proposal and submitted it to Director Johnson. It was a stir-fry vegetable sauce, inspired by the cooking of my grandma. Director Johnson skimmed through it and then pushed the proposal back at me, laughing disdainfully, and said, "Who would buy something like this?"
Our customers are looking for something more luxurious. We don't need such cheap stuff. Have you ever eaten anything nice?
I'm sorry, I'm not very familiar with high-end items. Could you please give me some more feedback on what needs to be improved?
Think for yourself. Well, maybe that's too much for you, having grown up in a Po family. Haha.
I apologize. This kind of thing continued daily. To be honest, it was hard to go to the office. But I absolutely could not quit because I had a reason to stay on. I had a dream to take my grandpa and grandma to a fancy restaurant with my first paycheck. I'm sure the two of them have never been to a high-end place. I don't think they've eaten out much at all. To raise me, they must have sacrificed a lot. I wanted to let them indulge, at least once. I wanted to let them meet their fill of an astonishingly delicious feast. I wanted to repay my two guardians, who had raised me as if I were their real family. 1 month after joining the company, I finally received my first paycheck. I felt proud that I had earned money by working for myself. Senior sales staff recommended a high-end restaurant to me that they had used for business dinners, so I made reservations for 3 and invited my grandpa and grandma. The two of them, who thought we were going to a nearby diner, were surprised when I tried to take them into the fancy restaurant.
Are we going inside such an upscale place?
Grandma seemed a little confused. I got my first paycheck. It's money I earned as a working adult. I've always dreamed of treating you two. Grandma had tears in her eyes.
Let's enjoy this feast, given Mike's heartfelt gesture. No need to hold back.
Grandpa said happily, as we nervously entered the high-end restaurant for the first time. We heard a familiar voice from a room in the back. The sliding door of the room opened and Director Johnson came out. Director Johnson, good evening. Instinctively, I bowed deeply.
Why are you here?
He looked at me suspiciously. Well, just having dinner with my family. I timidly answered.
This is a place I use to entertain important clients. It's not a place for ordinary people like you.
He continued to scrutinize us.
Coming to a fancy restaurant dressed so shabbily is totally inappropriate. Even if you ate expensive food, you wouldn't understand its value. Why don't you go to some cheap diner around the corner?
The words of Director Johnson pierced my heart. It's okay if it was just me, but this made my grandparents also uncomfortable. This turned out to be a disappointment, not an opportunity to honor them at all. I was at a loss for words, a mixture of shame and shock. Then, my grandpa, who had been quietly listening, spoke up.
The one who is out of place here is you.
His tone was colder than anything I had ever heard from him.
Who do you think you're speaking to, you?
Director Johnson, enraged, turned to confront Grandpa, but when he got a good look at his face, he yelled, "Mr. Thompson," and quickly turned pale, collapsing into his seat.
Bring happiness to all with the power of food.
Grandpa muttered. It was the corporate philosophy of Impress Foods.
I've kept this from you, Mike, for a while, but I've been thinking it's about time to talk. Will you listen?
He asked, and with that, Grandpa began to speak quietly.
We had a vast tract of land that has been passed down from our ancestors. It allowed us to live without any hardship. Then one day, the president of Impress Foods came to us, asking if we would sell our land. That was over 30 years ago. He said he wanted to build a factory and expand his business. When I listened to him carefully, I found out that Impress Foods had been donating food to children's homes. The president himself had grown up in a Po family, barely able to eat enough, and was always hungry. That's why he had a strong desire to provide delicious meals to as many children as possible. He spoke passionately about wanting to expand his business and put more effort into supporting orphans, Po families, and people in need. His feelings struck a chord with me. My wife and I loved children, but we were not blessed with our own, so we decided to help with his cause for the children. We kept only the minimum land necessary for our living and offered the rest to him. I agreed with Impress Foods' corporate philosophy of bring happiness to all with the power of food, and even became a shareholder and invested in the company. I vowed to use my money to help those in need. I've kept in touch with him ever since, and one day we went together to visit one of the children's homes he was supporting. That's where I met you, Mike. During mealtime, while other kids were fussing over "I hate bell peppers" or "I want a hamburger," Mike alone was happily eating his meal. You had a mouthful of rice and said delicious. You were so cute. I want to share meals with this child, I thought. I wanted you to be part of our family. Overflowing with such feelings, we adopted you. You grew up to be a very kind-hearted boy who could empathize with others. So I thought you might be able to contribute to a company like Impress Foods, which helps people.
That's admirable.
Said Director Johnson as he stood up and extended his hand to Grandpa.
I made a bit of a mistake earlier. Mike is a truly valuable asset.
He said, forcing a smile. As he approached with his outstretched hand, Grandpa coldly brushed it away, saying, "It's too late."
You'll probably never understand the true value of a meal, the value of a dining table shared with loved ones. Impress Foods is a company that rescues people in need through the power of food. You are not worthy of being associated with Impress Foods.
It was the first time I had seen Grandpa raise his voice.
I'll let the president know everything at tomorrow's shareholders meeting. Even if you go back to the company, you should expect that your seat is no longer there.
Director Johnson trembled and fled the scene. That day, we, the family of 3, enjoyed a delicious feast. While eating, they shared with me many stories that I hadn't known before. I was also able to tell them how hard I've been working. Do you think I've been able to repay you to a little bit?
Of course, just seeing you grow up and dedicate yourself to your job as a respectable working adult is more than enough payback.
Grandpa said with a happy look.
Today's meal is one we'll never forget.
Grandma said, thoroughly enjoying our family time. I feel like the bond within our family has deepened much more than before. The following day, there was no sign of Director Johnson at the company. He seemed to have gone into hiding, presumably for fear that his history of workplace bullying would be exposed. In fact, complaints were lodged by several new hires and disgruntled employees who had also been subject to Director Johnson's bullying, leading the board of directors to decide on his dismissal. The person who stepped into the role of the new head of sales was the senior sales staff who had recommended the fancy restaurant to me. The senior sales staff said, "Nobody has worked as hard as you have in their first month," praising my efforts. He even reviewed the proposal that had been rejected by Director Johnson and gave me a lot of advice.
"You might be able to become the president of the company one day,"
he said with a laugh, always treating me kindly. I want to gain a lot of experience and eventually get involved in a business that delivers delicious meals to those in need. For that reason, I want to fully commit to the work in front of me now. Every day, I work for society so that I can help make the happy times around the dining table with loved ones even more enjoyable